The doctor told him to stop, and his wife begged him to stop. But on July 3, 1981, Ross Martin ignored them both and paid the price with his life. Hollywood stayed quiet for 40 years about what really killed TV Best Master of Disguise. Now, shocking medical records have shown what really happened when the Wild Wild West star died on that tennis court. Robert Conrad, his best friend, couldn't save him, and the company that made a lot of money off of him wouldn't even come to his funeral. Daniel Ross Martin was born on March 22, 1920 in Grodek, Poland. His full name was Martin Rosenblat. There was a lot of doubt in the area where his family lived because they were Polish Jews. His father, Isach Rosenblat, worked as a tinsmith, and his mother, Sarah Lerner, ran the home. They were facing rising anti-Semitism and insecurity, just like many other Jewish families in Eastern Europe. Because they wanted a better life, they made the tough choice to leave everything behind and start over in the United States. When Martin was born, Grodek was in Poland. After World War II, the lines changed, and it is now in Ukraine. The area was always changing, which made daily life uncertain. His name would change too. Martin Rosenblat changed his name to Ross Martin, which fit his new life in the United States. He was only a baby when the trip across the ocean began. On August 29, 1920, his family got on the steamship New Rel in Danzig. They got to Ellis Island on September 18th, after being at sea for almost 3 weeks. His name was written down by immigration officials as Marcus Rosenblat, which is a small change that often happens during the paperwork process. Ellis Island was the first place that millions of people who wanted to start over went. Most people who went in steerage class were like the Rosenblat family. Before they could come to the United States, they had to pass strict physical and legal checks. Once they were free to live, they moved to the Bronx, which is full of foreigners trying to start over. Ross Martin learned to speak many languages well before he learned English as he grew up in this world. From time to time, he learned French, Spanish, and Italian. At home, he spoke Polish, Yiddish, and Russian. One of his best qualities was being able to speak many languages, which helped him later in life as an actress. He even used Russian in some parts when he played Artemis Gordon in the Wild Wild West. This gave his acts a more personal touch. Martin did very well in school, even though growing up in a working-class immigrant home was hard. He went to City College of New York, which is a great school known for helping a lot of first-generation kids. He got magna cum laude as his grade, showing that he was one of the smartest people in his class. He then got his law degree from the National University School of Law at George Washington University. He looked like he would have a steady job in business or law, but that wasn't what he wanted. He decided to act instead of becoming a lawyer. During the 1940s, he joined forces with Bernie West to make one funny act called Ross and West. They did fast-paced jokes and physical comedy all over upstate New York in vaudeville and bars. People loved them, and they were right on time. It was easy for Martin to make people laugh, and West later called him a comedic genius. Martin wanted to find more work in the show business, while West started writing and directing. Martin had already moved on to bigger things by the time West worked on comedies like All in the Family years later. He was on Broadway by 1953. What was his first big role? It was in Hazel Flag, a musical spoof based on the 1937 movie Nothing Sacred. He played Dr. Egelhofer in a show at the Mark Hellinger Theater that ran for 190 performances. Jewel Stein wrote the music for the show, and Bob Hilliard. Martin stood out because he was good on stage and could mix comedy and drama. He shared the stage with players like Thomas Mitchell and Helen Gallagher. He showed that he wasn't just a funny guy. He soon became well known on the radio after Broadway opened up new doors for him. Martin was a famous voice on radio shows like The Cavalcade of America and Dimension X in the late 1940s and early 1950s. He was able to switch between accents and roles so well that he got his own show, The Ross Martin Show. His ability to play different parts was shown in every episode. Sometimes he switched voices so smoothly that viewers didn't even know it was the same person. He became a popular voice actress because he could do a lot of different things, which helped him move into live TV anthologies. He was then called by Hollywood. From 1955 to 1957, he was in George Pal's science fiction blockbuster Conquest of Space, which was his first movie role. He played Sergeant Andre Fodor, a minor figure in a story with groundbreaking special effects and deep themes about life and death. Even though the movie wasn't a big hit, it was a big step forward for Martin. After only a few years, he was in The Colossus of New York, 1958, another sci-fi movie. His career in Hollywood was taking off, and this was just the start of a trip that would last for almost 30 years. When Ross Martin played Andemo on Blake Edwards' CBS show Mr. Lucky in 1959, it was his big break. Andemo is a smart gunrunner who worked with John Vivian's smooth-talking gambler. The show took place on a mobile casino, which made it both exciting and dangerous. Along with Martin's dry sense of humor, Andemo stood out right away. In the first episode, Lucky's plan to smuggle drugs goes badly when police find a secret stash of weapons on his boat. "We are in trouble. I am the one responsible for the gun smuggling," he said in a deadpan tone, which set the tone for how funny his character would be. Martin changed things about the part when he wasn't on TV. He made up lines on the spot and even made up his own mask. He dressed as a bartender in one scene to spy on mobsters. Besides that, he made his own makeup, which became an important part of his work. People said the show was funny and had a good style, but it didn't do well with viewers and was pulled after one season. Still, reviewers paid attention. A review and TV guide said Martin's performance was naturally charming and praised his skill at switching between accents and personalities. Even more importantly, Mr. Lucky put him in touch with Blake Edwards, a director who would be very important to his future. After 3 years, Martin's acting experiment in Terror, 1962, shocked people. He played the psychopath Garland Red Lynch, who terrorizes bank worker Kelly Sherwood, played by Lee Remick. In every way, it was different from the charming Andemo. Martin looked at a childhood friend who had asthma to get better at Lynch's creepy, hard breathing. He also insisted on doing all of his own moves, like a brutal garage attack scene that was filmed in just one take. The end result was scary. One of the scariest parts is when Lynch makes Sherwood listen on the phone as he chokes her friend. With each second that goes by, his breathing gets heavier. Some reviewers said it reminded them of Anthony Perkins's turn as Norman Bates in Psycho. The New York Times said Lynch was a master at making danger seem subtle. Later, director David Lynch, who is not related to Martin, said that the character was the inspiration for Twin Peaks Killer Bob. Martin was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor for the part, which is a rare honor for a bad guy in a movie. He almost turned it down because he didn't want to be typecast, but it turned out to be one of the most important roles of his career. 1965, that he could make a bad guy as funny as he could make one. He was Baron Rolf von Stupa, a sneaky nobleman who was planning a coup in the made-up kingdom of Carpia. Blake Edwards directed the movie, which also stars Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, but Martin stole the show every time he was in it. A fight between his character and Curtis's hero, Leslie, is one of the best parts of the movie. He then asks with a smirk, "I prefer a man's weapon. How are you with a saber?" and starts a fancy but pointless sword fight. Martin had great funny timing. He even made up lines during the famous 10-minute pie fight, which had more than 4,000 pies and was very hectic. He joked later, "I've never been so deliciously humiliated." People who didn't like him loved him. Many publications said that he was deliciously suave in his performance and that he literally stole every scene. The movie cost $12 million to make, which was the most ever spent on a comedy at the time. It proved Martin could play with Hollywood's biggest stars. Martin showed he could do everything from 1959 to 1965. Andemo was the sweet trickster. It was impossible to sleep when he played Garland Lynch. He was great at being a comic bad guy as Baron von Stupa. It was rare for someone to be able to switch between funny and scary. He said that growing up speaking more than one language and studying law gave him a critical attitude to acting. His skills were much more than just acting. Since his early days in Mr. Lucky, he had been making up characters for a long time. Blake Edwards once said, Ross had this magic that made you laugh and then scream, sometimes in the same scene. One of the most special things about him was that he could play anyone at any time. What it meant to be a friend on TV changed when Ross Martin came along. From 1965 to 1969, he played Artemus Gordon on The Wild Wild West. He wasn't just James West's backup. He knew a lot about spying, was great with gadgets, and was one of the best cover artists TV had ever seen. He was so good at changing roles that even his co-star Robert Conrad didn't always know who he was until the cameras were rolling. In his changing room, Martin made more than 90% of his own masks. He would start from scratch with wigs, makeup, and outfits with lots of small details. The team had no idea what would happen. In Night of the Vicious Valentine, 1967, he played a gravedigger who was hunched over and had bad teeth and a plastic hump. Some team members thought he was a background character because he looked so different. He was so good at changing roles that he didn't just use makeup. He also changed his voice, moves, and habits. He spoke 8 languages well: English, Polish, Yiddish, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, and German. He could also easily switch between accents. He changed into a showy French performer in Night of the Raven, 1966, giving himself a waxed beard and a false Parisian lilt. Ken Chase, who did the makeup for the show, later said that Martin was better at changing looks than most Hollywood effects teams. Martin would draw plans for disguises on napkins at lunch and then make them happen himself. His body was also pushed by the part. In 1968's Night of the Returning Dead, he played a burned-out arsonist and had to put on burn makeup all over his body for 12 hours. Even though the rubber made his skin very itchy, he wouldn't stop recording. Many people thought of Lon Chaney Sr., the famous silent movie star known as the Man of 1,000 Faces, when they saw how hard he worked. In Night of the Casual Killer, 1967, one of his most impressive skills was shown. As part of a tense secret scene, he played the violin to Chant's Nocturne in a fancy major. It wasn't just a show. Martin had studied at Juilliard in the 1940s and knew how to play the violin for concerts. The scene was filmed in one take with Martin playing live on set. The crew praised him so much that they were all crying, even the grips. His singing past wasn't just a fun fact. It was an important part of Artemus Gordon's spying. In Night of the Fugitives, 1966, he put a Morse code device in a harmonica and used it to send messages to James West while he was on the run from jail. Off-screen, Martin played the violin to unwind after doing dangerous stunts. During breaks, he would play Bach to calm down. For in a strange way, his classical training almost cost him the part. Producers thought he was too sophisticated for a Western when he tried out. To show them they were wrong, he made up a scene in which Gordon played the fiddle to confuse a bar full of criminals. He got the part because of it. Things went badly in 1968. Martin had a heart attack on August 17 while shooting Night of the Yemeni Death and almost died. The doctors found that his left coronary artery was 95% blocked. He was taken to Cedars Sinai Hospital right away, so the show couldn't have its co-star. No matter what, his results never got worse. In 1969, he was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor, which was a big deal for a show that was often thought of as silly. But just as he was becoming well known, on March 12, 1969, The Wild Wild West was suddenly ended. Even though the show had good ratings, it was ranked number 12 on the Nielsen charts. CBS had to cancel it because of political pressure. After the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, Congress began to crack down on violent TV shows. The Wild Wild West was an easy target, even though CBS kept showing the violent police show Mannix. When things went wrong, Ross Martin was at the top of his game. He almost died of a heart attack in 1968 during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West. He got better and came back to finish the show, but Hollywood no longer thought the same way about him. Insurers in the industry called him a high-risk person, and big networks pulled away. CBS ended the show in 1969 because of growing worries about violence on TV. Martin had a hard time getting lead parts after that. In 1970, he was offered the lead role in the detective show Banyan, which could have helped his career. However, the directors changed their thoughts after looking at his medical records. They chose Robert Forster instead, who was younger and wasn't worried about his health. In a 1975 interview with TV guide Martin's representative, Harry Gold, Gold said that studio officials were clear about their choice. They told him, "We can't gamble on a star who might die mid-season." Even guest parts were hard. Martin played art critic Dale Kingston in the 1971 movie Columbo, suitable for framing. The makers wanted a $250,000 insurance bond from him in case his health caused shooting to be delayed. Martin had to pay for it himself because the company wouldn't pick up the tab. He was nominated for an Emmy for the part, but his pay had dropped a lot. He made $115,000 an episode on the Wild Wild West when he was at his best. In 1973, he was only getting $3,000 for a single guest spot. It wasn't just live-action jobs that gave him problems. Hanna-Barbera hired him in 1972 to play Dr. Paul Williams in CAB 2020. Martin was replaced after only 2 shows because the studio's insurance company stepped in. He later made a joke. "I'm the only actor who got fired for having a heartbeat." He never stopped working, even though these things went wrong. He got 87 minor parts between 1970 and 1981. He became known for playing bad guys, strange thinkers, and shady masterminds. Even though Hollywood didn't want to give him a major part, they couldn't ignore how talented he was. He was in some of the most famous episodes of Hawaii Five-0, The Man from USNCLE. He showed that he could still own a scene in and love American style. From the beginning, it was clear that he could change into any figure. In the 1960 episode of The Twilight Zone called The Four of Us Are Dying, he played a con artist who could change his face whenever he wanted. Later, director John Bram said that Martin made up 4 different accents for the part, none of which were in the script, including that of a Brooklyn thief and a Southern gentleman. One of the most memorable roles he ever played was in Columbo, suitable for framing 1971. He played the cocky art critic Dale Kingston, who killed his uncle and put the blame on his aunt. Martin researched real-life art forger Elmer Dory to make the figure even better. While shooting, Peter Falk, who was playing Columbo, broke character and said, "I hate this guy." The 27-minute climax of the show, where Kingston is caught by art books with fingerprints on them, got the most viewers. 3 rating from Nielsen. It got the most viewers of any Columbo show in the first season. He played some funny parts too. He could also make people laugh. In The Man from USN. CLE. He played Professor Patrick Hudson, an engineer in the 1966 episode, The Sort of Do-It-Yourself Dreadful Affair. Hudson makes a machine that turns water into explosives. He had to use a lot of complex terms in his speech. He didn't memorize lines. Instead, he made up most of it on the spot, using physics terms from his old law school books. After the fact, director Joseph Sargent said, Ross sounded like he'd built a nuclear reactor in his garage. Ross Martin's real life was just as dramatic as his TV parts. His path of love and loss formed the Hey! He was changed by the man behind the roles and every connection. His wedding to Muriel Weiss took place in New York City on June 17, 1941. At the time, he was going to George Washington University to study law and working as a comedian at night. They had a daughter named Phyllis Rosenblat in 1943. She went on to become a famous artist in New York. Their marriage got harder as Martin took on more jobs on the radio and in New York, where he was just starting out. They broke up in the late 1950s, but never got divorced. Martin stayed loyal to Muriel even after they broke up. In 1962, she was told she had breast cancer, and he paid for her care in secret. the sickness wouldn't go away. Martin was making the first season of The Wild Wild West on March 15, 1965, when Muriel died. She was 47 years old. Executives at CBS were worried about production delays, so they wouldn't let him take time off for the funeral. Martin didn't care about them. He flew to New York overnight, said his last goodbye, and then came back to set the next morning without having slept. He told her years later, "I never forgiven myself for not being there when she needed me the most." He felt bad about what he did, and later gave $250,000 to cancer research in her name. Few people knew about Muriel's death for years. It wasn't until Martin got married again in 1967 that everyone knew the truth. When she was 24, Phyllis had a hard time with her dad's choice to move on. Afterward, she said, "He loved us, but Hollywood became his real family." Martin married Olavi Lucille Parsons in a small wedding in Beverly Hills on September 10, 1967. She had been a model and made documentaries before. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage. George was born in 1957, and Rebecca was born in 1955. Martin officially took them in as his own children and changed their birth papers to name him as their father. Some people thought this was an odd choice, but for Martin, it was a way to make their relationship permanent. In the end, Rebecca said, "He gave us more than his name. He gave us his heart." Almost right away, their marriage ran into a big problem. Martin almost died of a heart attack in August 1968 during the 4th season of The Wild Wild West. She made sure he took his medicine, sneaked oxygen tanks onto the set, and even talked to CBS about easing up on his work. To keep him on the job, she agreed to take a 30% pay cut. It was a lot of stress. He had a miscarriage in 1969, which Martin never talked about in public. They stayed strong as a family through it all. George, Martin's adopted son, also became an actor and got a part in the 1978 TV movie The New Maverick with the help of his dad. Olavi's impact made Martin try his hand at directed 2 episodes of Love, American Style, between 1971 and 1973, because she asked him to. They were there for each other through every problem and stayed together until the end. Ross Martin almost quit the part that made him famous. When CBS first asked him to play Artemis Gordon in The Wild Wild West in 1963, he turned them down 4 times. He was done with the Great Race and didn't want to watch TV every week. He was also afraid of being stuck in a certain role. Martin went to Juilliard, spoke 8 languages, and thought TV was a waste of time for artists. He didn't just want jobs that paid the bills. He wanted parts that pushed him. CBS was not going to give up. They really wanted him, so they made an offer that no actor could refuse. $5,000 per show, which is twice as much as Robert Conrad was making. And they could choose how he dressed. They even put the pilot on hold for 6 months while they tried to get him to change his mind. Artemis Gordon had to promise one last thing before he agreed. He would never punch anyone. He was a con artist, not a fighter. Martin pressed on it, which made the writers think of new ideas. Instead of fighting with her fists, Artemis used tricks, disguises, and tools, such as the sleepy gas cigar in the 1965 movie Night of the Inferno. It was risky, but it worked out. When the first episode of The Wild West aired on September 17, 1965, Martin got 3 times as much fan mail as Conrad. Even after all these years, he still couldn't believe how close he had been to throwing it all away. He said in 1978, "I almost ruined my own career. Thank God Blake Edwards told me I was stupid, because that made me change my mind." Martin's best work should have been in movies, but he almost gave up on that dream after one part. Blake Edwards cast him as the evil killer Red Lynch in Experiment in Terror in 1962. The performance was scary, but Columbia Pictures didn't put his name in the trailers or ads because they were afraid people wouldn't believe the Mr. Lucky Star was a killer. It was meant to make the movie scarier, but it didn't work. While critics loved Lynch's creepy personality, viewers didn't get it. Martin's voice could be heard in about 70% of the movie, but his name was nowhere to be found. Worse, when he tried out for other serious parts, casting directors turned him down because they thought he was more of a comedy character. So bad that it cost him a job in The Manchurian Candidate, which went to Lawrence Harvey. Even though the movie became a cult favorite, the damage was already done. Martin had stopped getting offers to be in movies by 1965, so the actor who used to avoid TV had no choice but to go back to it. Martin had a lot of ability, but his biggest fight wasn't in Hollywood. It was with his own heart. He passed out on a tennis court at the Sandy Tennis Ranch in Rona, California on July 3, 1981. It was a sad finish. After almost dying from a heart attack in 1968, he took up the sport to show how strong he was. In 1975, he had quadruple bypass surgery and was very strict about taking his medicine and working out. It was all not enough. People who saw him said he got dizzy in the middle of a game, stumbled toward the clubhouse, and then fell down just a few feet from the door. In 8 minutes, paramedics arrived, but his heart had stopped beating. He later told firefighter Art Bale. His wife, Olavi, was yelling, "Don't let him die." They shocked him twice, and it didn't work. He was not there when they got to Pomerado Hospital in Poway. The true time of death was 3:17 p.m. There was a blockage in the left anterior descending artery, which is also known as the widowmaker. His doctor later said, "We cleared him for light exercise, but his determination outpaced his physiology." Olavi was only 20 feet away when he fell. Since 1967, she had been his rock. She helped him get through his first heart attack and even snuck oxygen tanks onto the Wild Wild West sets to keep him going. She said the Lord's Prayer while her chest was being pressed in the ambulance. They didn't leave his side for 6 hours after they got to the hospital because she said, "He's just resting." She later sued the San Vicente Tennis Ranch for $1. $2 million, saying that the reaction time to the incident was too long. The case was solved without going to court. In 1968's Night of the Janus, Martin shot a scene that was almost exactly the same. In that scene, Artemis Gordon faked a heart attack to trick the bad guys. After the fact, Olavi said, the memory haunted her. Life imitated art in the worst way. His funeral was held at Los Angeles' Mount Sinai Memorial Park on July 7, 1981. There were more than 300 people there to mourn, but there were no talks or long eulogies. Instead, a priest said Kaddish. Robert Conrad was there, and he was scared. Afterward, Blake Edwards said, "Russ deserved a send-off as grand as the great race, but that wasn't his style." Only proper notices in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. CBS, which used to pay him more than their main star, didn't send anyone. Conrad was very angry. They stopped his show because it was too violent, but they didn't care about the artist who made it. It was even worse that his death certificate said he was a actor, retired, even though he had just filmed an episode of Love Boat 3 months before. Fans never forgot, though. To honor his most famous part, they still visit his grave at Mount Sinai every year on his birthday and leave little violins as a gift. Leonard Maltin said it best. Russ Martin didn't just die that day. Hollywood lost a part of its heart.